I didn't realize how small I'd become until my uncle leaned across the casket and spoke over my grandmother's body. The church smelled like lilies and old carpet cleaner, the kind that never quite masks what's underneath. I stood there with my hands folded too tightly, my nails biting into my palms, staring at Grandma's face as if she might open her eyes and rescue me from the moment. My uncle cleared his throat. Mom was a simple woman, he announced to the room, loud enough that people turned. She didn't believe in paperwork or legal nonsense. She trusted her family. He smiled, that practiced, reassuring smile he used when he wanted people to stop asking questions. A few heads nodded. Someone murmured, "That sounds like her." I felt my stomach drop, because 2 weeks earlier, Grandma had whispered something very different. I was alone with her in the hospital room. Machines humming, curtains half drawn. She had looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, but her grip on my hand was still firm. "If he tells you there's nothing," she said slowly, each word deliberate, "he's lying." I laughed nervously then, brushing it off. She'd been medicated, tired, emotional. Now, standing in the church, I understood she had been warning me. My uncle continued talking about how he'd take care of things, about how there was no need for lawyers dragging things out, about how family handled matters privately. He never once looked at me. I was just the granddaughter, the quiet one, the one who helped with groceries and doctor appointments, but didn't count when decisions were made. People kept coming up to him afterward, squeezing his arm, thanking him for stepping up. Someone told me, "You're lucky to have him." Lucky. I smiled because that's what I'd been trained to do. But inside, something felt off balance, like a picture hanging crooked that no one else noticed. At the graveside, as the coffin lowered, my uncle placed a hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm, possessive, as if I belonged to him now. "We'll talk soon," he said quietly. "About finances. About what's next." Finances. The word rang in my ears. Later, in the fellowship hall, while people drank coffee and picked at cookies, he cornered me near the coat rack. "I know this is hard," he said, lowering his voice. "But you don't need to worry about money. There isn't much. Medical bills ate most of it." He said it smoothly, too smoothly. I searched his face for grief, for uncertainty, for any crack. There was none. I nodded, because arguing at a funeral makes you look cruel. And I wasn't cruel. I was just observant. That night at home, I couldn't sleep. Grandma's face kept replaying in my mind, not from the casket, but from that hospital bed. "If he tells you there's nothing, he's lying." I got up and opened my purse, digging past receipts and lip balm until my fingers touched paper. An envelope, cream-colored, soft at the edges from being handled. She'd slipped it to me weeks ago and said, "Just hold on to this for me." I hadn't opened it. I told myself it wasn't my place. Now, my hand shook as I pulled it out. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded carefully. "There is a will," it read in her handwriting. I made sure of it. "If anything happens, call Mr. Halvorson. And don't tell my son. He'll try to control the story." I sat down hard on the edge of the bed, because suddenly, the funeral made sense. The speech, the confidence, the way my uncle had already decided how things would go. He wasn't grieving. He was managing risk. And the most unsettling part, I realized he thought I was no risk at all. They didn't know what I had already done. But as I stared at that letter, one question kept echoing in my mind. If he was lying this easily, what else had he already taken? I waited 3 weeks before asking him. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to see how comfortable he'd become with the lie. Comfort tells you everything. He invited me to lunch like it was his idea to be generous. Picked the restaurant himself. Linen napkins. Quiet enough that people wouldn't overhear, public enough that I wouldn't make a scene. He arrived early. Already seated. Already ordering. Same as usual for her. He told the waiter before I even sat down. I let that detail sink in. He still thought he knew me. "So," he said, folding his hands, looking at me with rehearsed concern. "How are you holding up?" I answered politely, carefully, like someone stepping across thin ice. We talked about nothing for a few minutes. Weather, traffic, the cost of groceries. He complained more than he listened. Then I asked, "What about Grandma's will?" The words landed softly, but the reaction didn't. He didn't blink, didn't hesitate, didn't even look surprised. There wasn't one, he said, lifting his glass. I checked, just like that. No sadness, no regret, no confusion. I watched the ice cubes clink together as he took a sip. She told me there was, I said. This time he smiled. A small one. Tight. Almost pitying. She told you a lot of things, he replied. Toward the end, she was imaginative. Imaginative. As if my grandmother, the woman who kept tax record from the 1970s, had suddenly started hallucinating legal documents. I went through her papers, he continued. Every drawer. Every folder. Nothing official. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Trust me, if there was a will, I would have found it.
He laughed. Not loudly. Just enough to make me feel foolish. Lawyers cost money, he said. Your grandma hated wasting money. I nodded slowly, even as my pulse hammered. Across the table sat a man who had raised his voice at a funeral and faced no resistance. A man who had rewritten reality so often, he believed it belonged to him. The waiter returned with our food. Conversation shifted, like the question had never been asked. But I noticed things now. How he avoided specifics. How he spoke in conclusions, not explanations. How he kept saying I handled it instead of here's how. When lunch ended, he paid. Not generously. Exact change. Don't stress about finances, he told me again as we stood. There's nothing to fight over. Fight. Another word that echoed. That night, I didn't go home. I drove straight to the address on Grandma's note. Mr. Halvorson's office was small. Quiet. Old books lining the walls. The kind of place that didn't forget things. When I gave him my name, he paused. Then nodded. I was wondering when you'd come, he said. The will was real. Not a draft. Not a plan. Final. Signed. Witnessed. $250,000. I felt dizzy as he explained it. The money wasn't meant to cause conflict. Grandma had been careful. Thoughtful. Most of it went to causes she loved. But the remainder? Me. And then there was the clause. The one he read twice. Any beneficiary who attempts to conceal, alter, or destroy this will forfeit their share entirely. I sat very still. Because suddenly, my uncle's confidence had a cost. And he had already paid it, without knowing. What happens now? I asked. The attorney folded his hands. That depends, he said gently, on how far he's willing to go. I drove home in silence. Because the truth had shifted something inside me. This wasn't about inheritance. It was about control. And my uncle wasn't done lying yet. What I didn't realize then was that the next call from him wouldn't be defensive. It would be desperate. And when it came, he would ask me for something he believed he was entitled to. Money. The same money he had sworn didn't exist. And the question that haunted me as I pulled into my driveway was this. How long should you let someone dig their own hole before you hand them the shovel? He waited just long enough that it almost felt natural. Long enough that our lunch conversation had faded. Long enough that he assumed the subject of Grandma's estate was closed. Long enough that his voice, when it finally came through my phone, carried something new. Nervousness. I hate to bother you, he said, after the usual pleasantries. I know you've got your own expenses. I leaned back against my kitchen counter and let him talk. I'm in a bit of a tight spot, he continued. Just temporarily. Rent went up. Taxes hit harder than expected. You know how it is. I did know how it was. I'd been budgeting carefully for years. Saying no to myself. Planning for emergencies no one else saw coming. He cleared his throat. I figured since you don't have kids, he said carefully, and you're doing all right, maybe you could help out. Family helping family. Family. The word had started to sound like a lever, something he pulled when he wanted movement. How much? I asked. He exhaled, relieved I hadn't said no outright. Just a couple months, he said. I'll pay you back as soon as things stabilize. As soon as. Another phrase without edges. I stared at the note on my fridge, the one with the attorney's number written in Grandma's careful handwriting. I could end this now. One phone call. One letter. One confrontation. But something inside me hesitated. Not out of fear. Out of curiosity. Because I wanted to know how far he thought he could go. I can help, I said. The relief in his voice was immediate. Too immediate. I knew I could count on you, he said warmly. Your grandma would be proud. That night, I made the transfer. And I saved the receipt. He called again the next month. Same tone. Same story. Slightly larger amount. I hate asking again, he said, even though it was getting easier for him every time. I sent the money. And saved everything. Texts. Voicemails. Casual mentions of how things were still tight. Little comments about how lucky I was to be so responsible. Each one documented. What I didn't realize then was how revealing desperation could be. He stopped pretending this was temporary. He started complaining. About how Grandma had been stingy. About how he'd earned more. About how unfair life was to him. Once he even said, if there had been a will, it would have been better if I handled it anyway. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I asked questions. Let him talk. Let him believe he was confiding in me. You've always been good with money, he told me during one call. Better than me. I raised you right. I let that sit. Because he hadn't raised me. Grandma had. And she'd raised me to watch, not react. By the third payment, he stopped saying thank you. By the fourth, he acted annoyed if I didn't send it immediately. You know rent's due, he snapped once. I don't like being in this position. I almost told him the truth then. That he'd put himself in that position. That every dollar he took tightened the net. Instead, I apologized. Because nothing disarms arrogance like believing it's winning. One evening, after I'd sent another transfer, I sat at my desk and laid everything out in front of me. Dates. Amounts. Messages. A timeline. It was no longer just about the will. It was about a pattern. And patterns are hard to explain away. I called Mr. Halvorsen. He's asking me for money, I said. There was a pause. Keep everything, he replied. And don't confront him. Why? I asked. Because, he said gently, he's building your case for you. I hung up and stared at the wall. Because suddenly, I understood something important. My uncle didn't see me as a threat. He saw me as a resource. Something to be drained quietly. What he didn't realize, what he couldn't imagine, was that every request made the truth louder. And soon, he wouldn't just be asking me privately. He'd start telling others a story. A story where he was still in control. And where I owed him everything. That was when I knew the real humiliation. The first time I heard what he was saying about me, it didn't come from him. It came from my cousin. We were standing in her driveway, the afternoon sun sharp and unforgiving, when she tilted her head and said, Uncle told me you've been helping him out financially. That's nice of you. Nice. The way she said it felt weighted. Like there was more behind it. Did he? I asked carefully. She shrugged. He said you owed him. For everything he's done over the years. I smiled. A slow, measured smile that kept my voice calm while something inside me went very still. Did he say that? I repeated. She nodded. He said Grandma would have wanted you to take care of him. There it was. The rewritten narrative. By the next family gathering, I could feel it in the air. The subtle shift. Conversations pausing when I walked in. Looks exchanged. The assumption that I was being managed. My uncle leaned back in his chair, holding court like always. She's good with money, he said, gesturing toward me without looking. I taught her everything she knows. Laughter followed. Polite. Unchallenging. I watched him carefully. How relaxed he was. How unafraid. Because liars only relax when they believe they're safe. I didn't correct him. I didn't defend myself. I listened. And I noticed how the story grew. In his version, he wasn't asking me for help. I was repaying him. For raising me. For guiding me. For being the man Grandma supposedly relied on. Each time he told it, he added a detail. Each time, he drifted further from the truth. And each time, I documented it. What I didn't realize then, I would think later, was how powerful silence can be when someone expects you to explode. He expected resistance. Instead, I gave him rope. The rent requests continued. So did the comments. You know, he said once over the phone, irritated, people are starting to notice when you're late. Late. As if the money were his. As if I were the irresponsible one. I apologized again. I hated how easy that word still came to my lips. But every apology bought me something. Time. Evidence. Confidence. His, not mine. One evening, he called sounding almost cheerful. Family dinner next week, he said. Be there. It wasn't a request. At the dinner, he was louder than usual. More animated. I don't know what I'd do without her, he told the table, waving his fork in my direction. She's finally giving back. Something inside me clicked. Finally. As if I'd been in debt my entire life. No one challenged him. Not then. But I saw it, the flicker of discomfort in a few faces. The way some people avoided my eyes. The way others studied him more closely than before. Lies start to show cracks when they're repeated too often. After dinner, as people stood around the kitchen, my uncle laughed and said, "Good thing she doesn't ask questions." He looked straight at me when he said it. I met his gaze and smiled. Because he was wrong. I asked questions all the time. I just didn't ask him. The next morning, I called Mr. Halvorsen again. He's telling people I owe him, I said. That he raised me. That I'm paying him back. There was a pause. Then, that helps, he said. Helps how? I asked. Because intent matters, he replied. And he's making his intent very clear. I hung up and stared at my phone. Because suddenly, I could see the shape of the ending. Not yet. Not rushed. But inevitable. My uncle had crossed a line he didn't even know existed. He hadn't just hidden a will. He had built a public lie around it. And soon, there would be an audience he couldn't control. The only question left was timing. Because if there's one thing arrogance never anticipates, it's being exposed calmly. Deliberately. In front of everyone who once believed you. And as I stood there in my quiet kitchen, I asked myself one final question before moving forward. How do you tell the truth, without saying a word at all? The lie changed shape the night he told it to the wrong person. It was supposed to be casual. A joke. The kind of offhand comment he'd been making for months, confident no one would ever challenge him. We were at my cousin's birthday dinner, squeezed around a long table in a noisy restaurant. Plates clattered. Glasses clinked. Everyone was relaxed, except me. I could feel it coming. My uncle had that look. The one he got when he felt admired. When he believed the room belonged to him. She's good for it, he said suddenly, laughing, nodding in my direction. Pays my rent like clockwork. The table went quiet. Not completely, but enough. Someone chuckled awkwardly. I felt heat crawl up my neck, but I kept my face still. That's what family does, he added, waving his hand. After all I've done for her. And then my aunt spoke. What do you mean, pays your rent? It wasn't accusatory. Just curious. He shrugged. She helps out. Owes me, really. Wouldn't have anything without me. The words landed heavier than he realized. Because now, it wasn't a vague story. It was a claim. A few people glanced at me, waiting. I lifted my glass and took a sip. Said nothing. And in that silence, something subtle shifted. After dinner, my cousin pulled me aside. "You okay?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "I'm fine." "But is that true?" she pressed. "About the rent?" I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, "He asked. I helped. That's all." Her brows furrowed. "That doesn't sound like what he said." "No," I agreed softly. "It doesn't." The next day, the phone calls started. Not from him. From relatives. Small questions. Careful ones. "How long has this been going on? Are you sure you're okay with it? Why didn't he mention this before?" I answered politely, briefly, truthfully, but incompletely. Because the truth doesn't have to be loud to be effective. It just has to be consistent. My uncle noticed the shift before I did. He called me that evening, his voice sharp. "What did you say to them?" he demanded. "Nothing," I replied. "Don't play dumb," he snapped. "People are asking questions." I let a pause stretch. "Maybe they're just curious," I said. He exhaled hard. "You don't need to make me look bad," he said. "After everything I've done for you." There it was again. The debt. The control. I thought about the will. The clause. The transfers. "How am I making you look bad?" I asked calmly. Silence. Then, "You know what I mean." No, I thought. I really don't. After the call, I forwarded the voicemail to Mr. Halvorsen. He called me back within the hour. "He's escalating," he said. "Which means he feels pressure." "What happens next?" I asked. "We set a date," he replied. A date. The word settled in my chest. The attorney explained the process. The notifications. The formal reading. "He'll be there," he said. "And so will anyone who wants answers." I hung up and stared at the wall. Because I knew exactly how my uncle would react. Denial. Anger. Performance. What he wouldn't expect was how much he'd already confessed. Over dinners. Over jokes. Over casual boasts. He thought he was establishing authority. What he was actually doing was leaving fingerprints everywhere. That night, I lay in bed thinking about Grandma. About how she'd watched him for years without confrontation. How she'd planned quietly. She'd known he wouldn't change. She'd known he'd expose himself. All she needed was someone patient enough to let him. The next morning, my uncle texted me. "Rent's due tomorrow." No greeting. No please. I stared at the message. Then I replied. "I know." And for the first time since the funeral, I didn't send the money. Because the lie had grown too loud. And now, it needed an audience. What I didn't realize then was that the moment he lost the money wasn't the moment he panicked. The moment he panicked was when he realized the story he'd told everyone was about to be told back to him. Out loud. In a room he couldn't control. The letter arrived 3 days later. Cream-colored. Official. Heavy in my hands. The same kind of envelope Grandma had trusted. I didn't open it right away. I already knew what it said. I'd approved every word. But my uncle didn't know. He called me that afternoon, his voice tight, edged with irritation. "Did you get something in the mail?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "And?" His impatience crackled through the line. "And I'll see you there," I replied. Silence. Then a short laugh. Forced. Unconvincing. "There's no need for all this," he said. "You know how lawyers are. They complicate things." I didn't answer. The day of the reading, the conference room was brighter than I expected. Large windows. Neutral walls. A long table that felt deliberately impersonal. Controlled. My uncle arrived early. He always did when he wanted to set the tone. He nodded at me once. Not warmly. Not hostile. Assessing. Other family members filtered in, curious, cautious, whispering. Some avoided my gaze. Others watched me closely, as if trying to decide which version of me was real. Mr. Halvorsen entered last. He greeted everyone politely and took his seat. "Thank you for coming," he began. "We're here to formally read the last will and testament of Margaret Ellis." My uncle leaned back, arms crossed, confident. "This won't take long," he said lightly. "There's not much to discuss." I watched his face. The lawyer read calmly, methodically. Names. Bequests. Donations. My uncle shifted when he realized the amounts weren't small. He frowned when my name was read. And then came the clause. The room seemed to hold its breath. "Any beneficiary who attempts to conceal, alter or destroy this will," Mr. Halvorsen read, "shall forfeit their share in its entirety." My uncle laughed. Actually laughed. "That's ridiculous," he said. "That's not." Mr. Halvorsen slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies. Signed. Dated. Witnessed. And then more. Bank records. Text messages. Voicemails. A timeline. "This documentation," the lawyer continued, "demonstrates that Mr. Ellis claimed no will existed while simultaneously benefiting financially from Ms. Ellis's heir." The word simultaneously landed like a verdict. My uncle stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is a setup," he shouted. "She manipulated this. She always had it out for me." He pointed at me. Every eye in the room followed his finger. I didn't flinch. Because I wasn't the one who'd been lying. Mr. Halvorsen remained seated. "Sir," he said evenly, "please lower your voice." My uncle's face flushed red. "She wouldn't do this," he insisted. "My mother wouldn't punish her own son." The lawyer looked at him steadily. "She didn't punish you," he said. "She protected herself." Silence fell. Heavy. Absolute. Then the final sentence. "As a result, Mr. Ellis forfeits any and all inheritance under this will." My uncle stared at the table. His mouth opened. Closed. For the first time, there was nothing rehearsed to reach for. He looked at me again. Not with anger this time. With confusion. As if he couldn't understand how the story had slipped out of his control. They didn't know what I had already done, I thought quietly. But now, everyone did. He left without saying another word. The door closed behind him with a sound that felt final. No one spoke for several seconds. Then someone cleared their throat. The meeting ended shortly after. People filed out slowly. Some avoided me. Others touched my arm gently as they passed. No one defended him. Outside, the air felt different. Lighter. But not victorious. Because exposure isn't loud. It's quiet. And it echoes long after the room empties. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed. A message from my uncle. "You didn't have to humiliate me." I stared at it. Then I typed back. "You did that yourself." And as I drove away, one thought stayed with me. Steady, undeniable. The truth doesn't need permission to be heard. It just needs time. The quiet afterward was the strangest part. No shouting. No dramatic fallout. Just absence. My uncle didn't call again. Not to argue. Not to apologize. Not even to blame me. The man who had always needed the last word simply vanished. At first, I thought it wouldn't last. I kept expecting a knock at my door. A long message. Some final attempt to rewrite the story. But days passed. Then weeks. And the silence settled in. Family gatherings changed without anyone acknowledging it. Chairs shifted. Conversations adjusted. His name came up less and less, like a word people were collectively learning to forget. Someone else brought the potato salad. Someone else told the old stories. No one filled the space he'd taken. That was when I realized something uncomfortable. He had always seemed central. But he was never essential. The rent money was returned, not by choice, but by order. The transfers reversed with the same cold efficiency with which they'd been taken. When I saw the deposit, I didn't feel relief. I felt confirmation. Because it meant the story was over, I slept better. I spoke more directly. I stopped explaining myself to people who weren't listening. One afternoon, I visited Grandma's grave. The ground had settled. The headstone clean and simple. I told her everything. About the lunch. About the rent. About the room where the truth finally spoke. I didn't raise my voice, I said softly. I didn't fight him. The wind moved through the trees. I just let him keep talking. I imagined her smiling, that knowing, patient smile. Because she'd understood something I was only just learning. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it waits. My uncle moved shortly after. Smaller place. Farther away. Someone told me he said the family had turned against him. I didn't correct that either. Let him keep the story he needed. I had the truth. And it didn't require an audience anymore. Months later, I received a letter from one of the charities Grandma had supported. They thanked me, not for the money, but for ensuring her wishes were honored. That mattered more than the inheritance. Because it reminded me why this had never been about winning. It had been about finishing something she'd started. The last time I heard my uncle's name, it was in passing. "Oh, him," someone said. I haven't spoken to him in a while. No anger. No drama. Just distance. And I realized then what real consequences look like. Not explosions. Erosion. I went home that night and stood in my kitchen, the same place where I'd once stared at my phone, debating whether to send him money again. I thought about the woman I'd been then. Quiet. Careful. Afraid of being seen as unkind. And I thought about the woman I was now. Still quiet. Still careful. But no longer available for manipulation. What I didn't realize at the beginning of all this was that Grandma hadn't just left me money. She'd left me proof. Proof that truth survives patience. That dignity outlasts arrogance. And that sometimes, the most powerful revenge is simply refusing to participate in someone else's lie. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.